Greetings, everyone. Thank you so much for taking time to watch this video. I'm going to share my screen with you so that you can see the PowerPoint slides. My name is Barbara Kappler, and I'm Assistant Dean and Director of International Student and Scholar Services at the University of Minnesota. I have a lifelong interest in the topic of intercultural learning and intercultural facilitation. And I'm excited to share a few key things from a book co-edited with Inga Steglitz from Michigan State University. She was an amazing mentor for me when I was in the PhD program. I am drawing from a chapter in this book that is co-authored with Thorm Bjarnadottir. There are a few things that we wanted to highlight before you're taking the workshop that draw upon some key principles from this chapter. We, of course, also want to highlight some of the things that were on our minds with the 3-option model that you have read about in this chapter. Before I begin, I want to mention in my own passion for the learning environment, I'm kind of most drawn to those moments when we are hearing directly from students, we're hearing them express their perspectives, and we're seeing others learn from these perspectives. I also recognize that we are often in the vicinity of one another, not hearing one another's experiences, not necessarily understanding the extent to which our lived experiences are different. I think, though, that intercultural facilitation offers opportunity to support, to challenge our students, our participants, to do that very learning and listening and growing from one another's experiences. I believe that intercultural facilitation creates possibility for improving the learning environments. There's always trade-offs. In our focus in, of course, this video, but also in the workshop, we are attending to the practice and development of intercultural facilitation. In doing so, we have a number of assumptions. First of all, that you are looking to be developing designs that have taken into account, of course, your own experience, but the experience of teaching experts. And we have resources that recommend excellent experts that we have relied upon at University of Minnesota and across the nation and world to help improve our learning environments. Using activities that you're familiar with, testing them out with colleagues, working through to make sure that you understand the logistics of the activity, but also the risks. And I'll mention risks at the end of this video as well. Certainly getting feedback from others as you learn and develop skills. I know that I am in co-training environments and have opportunity to get feedback from others. I know that's a luxury. I also many a time have invited professionals to be giving me feedback in order to help me be aware of things that I might not have had on my mind, given that there's so much to be considering in the teaching and facilitating environment. Of course, to be constantly reflecting on our biases. What is it that we might frequently be missing, occasionally be missing, having a hot button about? How do we make ourselves aware of those so that in the learning environment, we are using our energies to be present with participants, with students? Of course, we also want to be analyzing the risks for learners, and then that we're able to speak to them, especially regarding racism and bias, and then that we're also able to incorporate strategies to balance both challenge and support. There are an abundance of resources to help us prepare in these ways, and they're not part of the workshop environment that we are providing for you. So jumping into facilitation, separate from intercultural facilitation, what does this word mean? Well, the history is that it's derived from Latin, and the focus is on easy or to ease, which does not mean that the process of facilitation itself is easy, but rather that the facilitator is easing, the facilitator is assisting and supporting others in this process. So then the question is, what is intercultural facilitation? So in addition to paying attention to all of the things in the environment that we need to be easing the process of the learning, supporting the process of the learning, we are also attending to a shift in perspectives. And fundamentally, historically, what intercultural communication, intercultural learning, intercultural facilitation has offered is this process of helping participants, students, to understand the experience, that they are using the lens of their own culture, of their own lived experience to make sense of it. And that's what is depicted in this cartoon, which is, even in an attempt to make art that draws upon the perspective, the view of another, that we do not do so, of course, without seeing directly from our own lens, from our own perspective. Right now, as an intercultural facilitator, as an educator, I am more and more aware of my own background, my own histories that are influencing every interaction that I'm having. Being cisgender, growing up in a small town in the Midwest of the United States, growing up in an environment of a transition from a working class environment to a middle class environment, that affects my sense of priorities, that affects the language that I use, that affects how I see the world, how I understand and haven't always understood the privileges and the dynamics in the environments that I am working in. So my responsibilities towards myself as a facilitator, of course, as we mentioned in the assumptions, what are we doing to be ready for being in this facilitative environment? And then how are we preparing an environment, being present in an environment in order to help facilitate others' experiences as they gain deeper and deeper insights into the ways in which the lens that they have on the world, the lens that we all have, is influenced by our lived experiences. Going to give you a moment to read these to yourself. So as facilitators, as I mentioned, we're always drawing upon our own experiences. My first experiences in an official teaching capacity were in the public speaking environment. I was teaching a group of students that didn't necessarily want to be there. The thought for many students of getting up and speaking in front of their fellow classmates was horrifying. So for me, my teaching experiences began in this grounding of creating an environment of support in which we are asking people to do something that they don't necessarily want to do. And so certainly encouragement and attentiveness to the environment, to the anxieties of those present, was a significant factor of my foundation. I'm now drawing upon additional frameworks and experiences, of course. The studies that I've done in intercultural competency, cultural humility, intercultural communication concepts. And I mention that because my encouragement to each of you is to be deeply considering what are the foundational experiences that you draw upon? What are those professional moments that are shaping how you see the learning environment, how you aspire for that learning environment to be for yourself and, most importantly, for others? And then what are the intellectual frameworks that we're also bringing into this environment? Several things to keep in mind in the intercultural learning environment, intercultural facilitation. First of all, it's learner-centered. We can write all the learning objectives that we want, beautifully done, perfectly edited for last year's group. But then for this year's group, if we're truly learner-centered, they're always evolving. As a facilitator, what we are doing, I believe, when we are present with others is listening intently so that we can hear the course concepts, the dimensions, the struggles, the insights, all that is present, all that is offered to us to work with for learning. Many talk about the art of facilitation. There is nothing that this list, that a list I give you, that a conversation that I have with you, that you dedicate your life to, there's nothing specific that can tell each of us what that art form is. I believe it comes from a deep commitment to being present with others. It doesn't mean we're going to catch everything. It doesn't mean that being present eliminates our bias. It does, though, push us, challenge us in the right direction, I believe. One of the things that has always been on my mind in this study and examination of facilitation is how difficult it is to pay attention, because there's so much to pay attention to. There is the room temperature, the noises, the simultaneous comments. There is the internal conversation that you're having. There are time pressures. There is content pressure. How is this relating? There is worry in the classroom. There is deep, legitimate concern about how students are hearing each other, mishearing each other, the marginalized voice in the classroom, voices in the classroom. So much stimulus in every particular experience that we enter into. And it was that awareness of the stimulus that made me so interested in, can we provide some tools, some simplification to think about facilitation, not because it's a simple process, but to enable us to consider how we can challenge ourselves to do even more in this environment. And by doing more, I mean emphasizing and focusing on the learning that's occurring in that environment. So with that in mind, after analyzing many intercultural facilitation experiences, I have begun offering this notion of 3 options to consider. I'm not necessarily suggesting these are fully exclusive of all the choices that we have, but present it to you as a way to consider in the moment of facilitation, in the moment when you have done an activity, had a reading, a video clip, some type of educational experience, what happens next? And how can you think about what's happening in that environment in a way that frees you up for more opportunities. So I am presenting that there are three options to consider. So you've had some type of stimulus. Let's say it's a reading. So it's time in the evening of your class, it's time in the day of your class to be getting into the discussion. So you ask a question, a student makes a comment, they've offered something to you and to others. What do you do now? Well, you can ask the participant, the student who spoke, a probing question. Why might you do so? Whole variety of reasons, lots of advantages. Maybe you simply want to understand more. Maybe you know from the students' postings done to you that this student has a lot to say, a lot to offer. Maybe it's the first time the student has chosen to participate in this way in the classroom and you want to support that. Or maybe you feel like, I am going to let this be and I'm going to see what else I want to add to it. It's just an option. But the probing is a choice that you can make. It's a choice you can make often to get to more depth. It's a choice you can make to encourage a student to be continuing to process in that situation. Or you can provide a comment or a mini lecture. A student says something and you believe that many students might see a direct connection to the learning objectives of the class or something else that was read last week. Or you might be concerned that not all the students might readily see that connection. And so you provide a comment, a mini lecture, brief, in which you make a connection from what the student said to something else that's important in the class. Advantages are that we propel the content forward of the course. The disadvantage with mini lectures is it can provide a situation if we do them frequently, or especially if it's the only thing we do as a response to a statement, that it's really then that the facilitation is fully a dialogue with the instructor. And there might be many reasons where that's completely appropriate for the objectives that you have. It's like the other two to be used, though, more holistically as one of the options and not the only option would be my recommendation. So again, going back to the options, student has said something. If you choose not to probe, if you choose not to give a mini lecture, then turning it back to the group. One of the most common ways to do so is to simply say, does anyone else have something to add here? Let's add more comments here. It's great to hear from you. I'd like to hear more. A whole number of ways to elicit responses. You can ask the same question. You can generate a new question. Lots of different reasons for the pathway that you might choose. You might be simply wanting to fill the room with a variety of responses so that you as an instructor are getting a sense of how are students really thinking about this topic. And so hearing from more students, of course, gives you access to their thoughts, to the processing, and then to the interactions. How are other students responding? My hope for each of you as you think about your teaching, as you think about these interactive moments, that you sit with them, you reflect on them, and you say, what if I had asked a probing question there? What might I have gotten as an additional gift to work with? Was there something that made me concerned about probing? Was I being attentive to a reaction in the student? And it might not be a good thing to do. Where might I add more mini lecture to connect to the content? What could I be doing to be gathering more information? How can I use each of these options? In that reflection, I encourage you also to be considering, am I using all three? Am I using them in a balance in a way that I think is really good for the objectives that I have? There is no one combination of these. There is no one specific pathway approach that I am recommending. I think you can see that it's more an awareness of how we might be using these to push ourselves forward, to be reaching the student, to be reaching the objectives that we are hoping to achieve. I have a couple of other things to mention just as underlying concepts. First of all is theories and frameworks. When I am facilitating, just like when you are, I am drawing upon the intellectual frameworks and lived experiences that I have. What has resonated with my own learning that I'm then sharing in this environment? For example, the developmental model of intercultural sensitivity is a model that speaks to me. I believe that there are insights we gain when we pay attention to how are my students responding to the experience of difference. The developmental model of intercultural sensitivity is a staged model. I don't personally believe that it is a linear experience. However, these stages do provide some insight about what are the questions that I might bring forward in this situation towards the goal of helping people understand the extent to which we are experiencing the world through our own lived experience. What I might ask in a stage, an assumption where maybe people are pushing back against difference, that's the experience of difference, is to push against it, compared to a sense of a misinterpretation of the extent to which one really understands difference. So there I might ask a question, tell me more how you reached that conclusion. Did you have an experience? Did you have a conversation with others to help shed light on a difference in values? Is it something that you're assuming and you need to gather more information? So I'm just sharing with you as an example how I might be considering and using developmental model of intercultural sensitivity in my facilitation. There are many models. We are providing resources for you about each of these. And then, of course, an encouragement about considerations of the models and frameworks that you are using as well. I write about this with Thorn Bjarnadottir in the chapter on intercultural facilitation, a consideration of, in addition to the attentiveness to facilitation, what are the debriefing questions that you are using to process any particular activity or experience? And I'm sharing this with you as it's an incredibly common framework to move from the emotional experience, the feelings that one had, to descriptions, to then applications. So a much beloved framework from Tyagi. Finally, I want to close with a consideration of the risk factors. Activities that we introduce, discussions that we hold with students absolutely introduce risks. I am recommending a reading of a review of these risks and the intensity of the learning environment from the Maximizing Study Abroad discussions and theoretical frameworks. So we'll share that reference with you. I also want to challenge us as educators. Of course, we are responsible for what we bring forward in the learning environment and having opportunity to really have a debrief, to have a facilitated discussion. These risks exist in the classroom, even if we're not doing an activity. They are risks that are present when we bring people together. And I would encourage each of us to be skilling ourselves to be having the intercultural facilitated discussions that transfer the risk into the deeper learning. And I end with that, and I end with encouragement for each of you to digest this information, to take from it what is helpful, valuable, and to be entering into the workshop space ready for more. Thank you to each and every one of you.